Hello, welcome to CNY Therapy Solutions webinar series. Today's topic is postpartum planning. So happy to have you here today as you're watching this recording of our webinar that we aired a few weeks back on May 15th. Today is all about postpartum planning and taking care of you during postpartum. We're happy that you're here. My name is Sarah Chapple. I am a therapist here at CNY Therapy Solutions. I have my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Syracuse University. And at CNY Therapy Solutions, I specialize in perinatal mental health. So, what that really means is the period from trying to conceive all the way to postpartum and honestly, beyond. I'm also a mom of 3 boys, 2 of which are human and 1 of which are fur. I have a golden retriever. So I want to start with this beautiful poem by the poet Jessica Ehrlich, who has a social media presence. Maybe you have seen or come across her work before, but I wanted to share this beautiful poem, which I thought was so fitting, not only for our presentation today, but also about motherhood, parenthood. So, this is Welcome to Motherhood. When I entered motherhood, I walked through a little door. This is motherhood, it read. Everyone sat there in stripy tops, exchanging pleasantries, things scattered all over the floor, bags overflowing, nervous smiles. Connected by motherhood, disconnected by unspoken truths. Then someone said, I love being a mom, but this is also really hard. Then suddenly, I didn't feel alone anymore. What a fitting introduction to today's topic of postpartum planning. Whether this is your first or your fifth, or you're supporting someone in your life who is going through this time, it's a lot. There's a lot that's going on, and today I'm excited to share with you all a little bit of how planning for this time of life can go a long way. So postpartum, what is it? What is postpartum? Start with some memes that I came across, which we all know on the internet there's an abundance of memes, never a shortage. So these are just 2 that stuck out to me that I thought were kind of funny. But what is postpartum? So chances are we have all heard that word before. And you might have even certain words, feelings that come to mind to describe the postpartum period. So I want you to take a moment to think about that. What words or feelings come to your mind when you think about postpartum, whether it is postpartum, your postpartum period that you have had in the past, right? Or maybe your first postpartum that you haven't experienced yet, right? Thinking of expectations or, um, having these assumptions maybe about what you've heard it's like, right? Because chances are we've all heard what it's like during postpartum from people in our lives. Oftentimes, maybe some unsolicited feedback or input or opinions about the postpartum time period. But I think it's safe to say that we probably have some ideas that come to mind, whether or not they're true or those are going to be true for us is something else. So, definitions, right? Like when we do a quick Google search for postpartum, this is what comes up. Just to give some context to Google, right? The postpartum period, the time after giving birth, it's generally considered to last for 6 to 8 weeks. However, some sources like ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, say that 3 times fast, extend this period to 12 weeks, referring to it as the fourth trimester. Complete recovery, including returning to pre-pregnancy physical and emotional states, can take longer, potentially up to a year. So medically, there are more timeframes associated with the postpartum period. You have a 6-week appointment, right? Your baby has all these appointments. Generally speaking, in the medical healthcare community, we tend to define postpartum timeframe as that time from birth up to 1 year after birth. But let's remember that even though there's a time frame for healthcare, postpartum is also forever. Your body, your mind, your mental and emotional health, right? You have went through so much. And these changes from pregnancy, labor, delivery, postpartum, it's forever. Those changes have impacted you for the rest of your life. So before we dive in to today's topic and get into the meat of postpartum planning, have to mention PMADs briefly. So PMADs, what is that? What are PMADs? So PMADs, also known as perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, are defined by the Motherhood Center as postpartum depression or a group of symptoms that can affect women or birthing people during pregnancy and in the postpartum period, causing emotional and physical problems that make it hard to enjoy life and function well. So, chances are you're probably familiar with the term postpartum depression, which I think is actually often used as this catch-all for PMADs, right? Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And it's important to understand that postpartum depression is a mood disorder, right? And a diagnosis, but there are also other disorders or diagnoses that one can experience, right, during the perinatal period. So whether it's postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, even things like postpartum psychosis, postpartum depression is just one of the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Now, today's presentation is not therapy. It's not a substitute for advice from your licensed healthcare provider. But we do like to mention PMADs because they are not uncommon. Actually, 1 in 5 women will experience a perinatal mood and an anxiety disorder during pregnancy or during that first year postpartum, meaning that PMADs are actually the most common complication of pregnancy. So, awareness and if any of that information that I shared with you, or if you do a little bit of a deep dive into it and some of the symptoms of PMADs resonate with you, it's a reminder to reach out to your healthcare professional and to seek out some additional support, which can also include our office. I will be sharing our contact information, including my own, at the end of this presentation if you are interested in getting mental health support for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. All right. So, postpartum planning, support. Let's dive in to the meat of today's presentation. Why is support so critical during postpartum? Well, according to research, studies consistently have shown that pregnant and postpartum women with stronger and more robust social support systems experience fewer symptoms of perinatal depression than women who don't have as much support. So it makes sense, right? Having a support system, support in general, can go a long way in helping us navigate the postpartum period. So today we'll talk about how we can plan for postpartum and how part of that planning includes support, whether it's support from people in our lives, friends, family, providers, or even just also lining up these logistics that change really drastically during the postpartum period, and how all of that can kind of come together as this web or network of support that we really need during this time. I also know that asking for and receiving support can be difficult. So you might find that this is harder for you than you anticipated, this asking and or receiving of support from others in your life. And while it really does take a village, right? There's that kind of cliche phrase of it takes a village. It really does. You might also find yourself wondering where your village is. So I just want to let you know that if you are finding that you might not have that village of support people, that it is possible to create that support system for yourself. And we will be talking a bit about that today as well. So, some questions to consider. What is my greatest concern about the postpartum period? What is my partner's greatest concern about the postpartum period? Chances are there are some concerns that you might have, or worries, or anxieties about what this postpartum period might contain for you. Also, who does my support team consist of? So, again, I just mentioned we might not feel like we have the village that we want or even need. Some questions that you can ask yourself are there healthcare professionals, right? Now, this, of course, they don't replace the support of having family or friends or other individuals in our lives outside, of the healthcare setting. But these individuals are part of your support network and they are a place to start. So, some examples of healthcare providers or professionals that you may and likely are encountering during pregnancy and postpartum are individuals like your OBGYN or your midwife, your PCP, your primary care provider. You might also have a therapist or a psychiatrist, a doula, right? Lactation consultant. So getting into some of these providers again that specialize in working with individuals during the perinatal period. Even a physical therapist, so pelvic floor physical therapy, chiropractor who specializes in perinatal chiropractic work, or even yoga or a fitness instructor. These are all professionals who are along your pregnancy and postpartum journey with you and can be a source of support during the time that you do have with them. And that can also likely help you find other sources of support. So, for example, I know that as a therapist, our office as therapists, we often work with these providers and communicate with them and give and receive referrals. So I've had clients of my own as a therapist who I've referred to lactation consultants or pelvic floor physical therapists and vice versa. So don't forget about this wider network of support in your community that might not initially come to mind when you think about your support or your village. And there might be some other ones that you can think of that aren't on this list. So let's go into the categories and types of support. We'll be diving into each one of these four categories into more detail. I also want to mention at the end of this presentation, there will be a link to Postpartum Support International's postpartum planning document that actually outlines these categories and gives space to write your responses to them. So a lot of these questions and categories are adapted from that document. We found them to be some of the most common questions and most helpful to help with the postpartum planning. So know that that's out there, and you can also reach out to us for that link. You could Google it. Again, I'll have it at the end of the presentation. It is Postpartum Support International's postpartum planning document. So categories and types of support that we'll dive a little bit deeper into. One is sleep, rest, and physical recovery. Two is mental and emotional health. Three is household and practical concerns. Four is visitors, social support, and boundaries. So let's dive into that first category of sleep, rest, and physical recovery. So here are some questions that you can ask yourself to plan for this category of sleep, rest, and physical recovery during your postpartum period. Chances are some of these are questions that you've already asked yourself, or topics or areas that have come to mind, right? I mean, sleep. We all have heard, those comments from people, again, a lot of times unsolicited, right? But this feedback, this advice, these opinions about sleep, right? What do we all hear? You're never going to sleep, or sleep is really hard to come by, or sleep, right? And a lot of that is rooted in truth. What we do know is that newborns, especially, they're not sleeping much, right? We don't know, of course, what your unique postpartum journey will be like, your experience with sleep, but it's pretty safe to say that sleep will likely be disrupted, right? So these questions can help guide you. And I think an important thing to keep in mind for, all of these categories throughout all of this postpartum planning is that we can plan, but we also have to be flexible and understand that plans can change, right? And that we don't know exactly what will happen, and we likely will have to adapt and adjust to our own unique postpartum experience when we're actually in it, right? While it's happening. Okay, so keep that in mind. But these are some questions to help guide you and that can help you plan and know a little bit about how to prepare for your own sleep and rest and physical recovery during postpartum. So questions such as knowing yourself, right? How many hours of sleep do you need every night to function, right? To feel good? Where will your baby sleep? How can you utilize time for rest if sleep isn't possible, right? Are there any areas that you can prepare ahead of time for overnight needs with baby, such as feeding or changing? How might you be able to work with your partner or support person about sleep? Does that maybe mean taking shifts with someone? Does it mean maybe hiring an overnight doula? Thinking of your physical recovery too, of course. How does the type of birth that you've had impact your sleep and rest and recovery? So, one example that comes to mind is if you have a C section, right? Where's your bedroom? Is it on another level? Do you have to go up and down stairs to access your room or a baby sleeping? How does that impact your ability? So, thinking of location of the room, of bathrooms, of stairs. Okay, our next category, mental and emotional health. It's a big one, right? So, again, some questions to guide your planning for mental and emotional health. And I think each one of these categories, but especially mental and emotional health, could be, a presentation in its own right. So these are just meant to get the wheels turning, and if anything in particular about, this mental and emotional preparation really connects with you, or you find out you have some concerns, don't hesitate to reach out for support. And again, that includes our office if you're interested in connecting with a therapist who specializes in perinatal mental health. So, what are some questions that you can ask yourself? How do you cope with stress and fatigue? Not only right now, but historically. How do you navigate really stressful times? How have you done that throughout your life? What are some ways that come to mind about how you can take care of your own mental and emotional health once your baby is born? The next one I think is really important. What are your own red flags that you are struggling and in need of extra support? So identifying your own unique red flags, right? Like if these things happen, this is how I know that I'm struggling, or I'm struggling to the point where I might need some extra support, whether that's reaching out to my doctor or a therapist. So identifying those things ahead of time can be really important, and especially looping in your partner or your support person about those red flags, because there's going to be a lot going on. This is such a significant life transition, and also you're taking care of this baby who has so many needs, right? That you can really easily not notice even the ways that you're struggling, understandably, right? And sometimes our partners or a support person or people in our lives can notice before we do that we're struggling. So making sure that you're looping in those people about your own red flags. So that also means, who are the people that you feel comfortable sharing those red flags with? Are these the people that you can also likely reach out to for additional support? And of course, who will support your partner during this time? Because the non birthing parent is also going through all this, right? While they didn't experience pregnancy or labor or delivery physically, they're also a part of everything as well. So thinking about them and how they can access support too can be something to think about. Okay, we'll go on to the next category, our third category, which is household and practical concerns. Now, these are some of the more logistical components which come up a lot unsurprisingly, right? When you add a new baby into the mix, logistics are changed drastically. Whether you already have children or this is the first baby that you're navigating, there's a lot that you do differently or you will do differently now that you have a baby in the picture, especially in that postpartum period, especially in those first few months. And again, these are all things that, yes, they're logistic, but they're so important because they help you take care of yourself, right? We know that you're busy. You will be busy taking care of your baby, taking care of other children, taking care, of other people. But the point of today's presentation is to remind you that you also deserve, and I would even say it's imperative that you take care of yourself as well. Okay. So these logistical pieces, when it comes to feeding yourself, right? Taking showers, taking care of your physical body, right? That is just as important as taking care of your baby. So, some questions to help navigate this. Who can help you with food, right? Who can help maybe prepare meals, do dishes, clean up, right? Do all the dishes, load the dishwasher, clean the kitchen, clean the food up, put it away, take out the garbage, right? All of these household tasks that you probably, maybe didn't enjoy doing a lot of them, but once you have a baby, we can feel like there's not enough hands, literally, to do all of this. So identifying the tasks that need to be done, and if you or your partner or support person can't do them, who can help you? Especially with food, right? We know that you need to eat. You might find that you're hungrier too than normal, especially if you're breastfeeding, right? So who can help you not only cook, but are there other ways to incorporate you getting the food that you need into your life in an easier and more accessible way? Does that maybe mean making or freezing meals ahead of time, right? To have them on hand so you can just pop them in the microwave, you know, defrost them or pop them in the crock pot to make it really easy. Does that mean maybe utilizing a meal delivery service, right? When I think of the household and practical concerns kind of category of support, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is like cashing in on this support. So chances are you've probably had people in your life offering to help, right? Like, what can I do to help? I'm happy to help. Let me know what I can do. And as I mentioned earlier, it might feel hard to ask for or receive that support, but now is the time to cash in on that support. We have to let other people, give us the chance to help us. That might be really difficult. There are seasons of giving and receiving, and in the postpartum period, you are in a season of receiving. So cash in on that support that people are often generously offering. Maybe that means dropping off food, right? Helping with laundry. Okay. And we might find that boundaries will come up during this time, which we'll get into in a little bit more depth in our next slide. How to navigate, those boundaries and interacting with these people. And we want their support, right? But we also need to make sure we're still taking care of ourselves. And it's not, yes, you can drop off the food, but maybe it's not the right time to come in, right? Maybe I need to rest and I don't want to have to entertain you. Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But some other questions too, especially with food. Are there any convenient, easy, accessible, nutritious, filling snacks or meals that you can keep on hand? Even better if they can be eaten one-handed. and, who can help during this time with other household chores or responsibilities like laundry or, cleaning the bathroom, keeping the house somewhat together. And somewhat being the key word, because I think that ties into this last point here about, you are probably going to have to consider adjusting your own standards around cleanliness and organization during this time, right? Because you are not going to be able to keep up in the way that you were before your baby was born, right? Or before pregnancy. So consider how adjusting your own standards and expectations might help you navigate these household and practical concerns. So asking yourself, what are some areas that you can let go of, even just a little bit? Okay, our last category of visitors and social support, aka boundaries that I just mentioned in the previous slide, right? So we're interacting with a lot of people, right? That village that might be there that wants to help can also be tricky to navigate. So the big thing I think with planning is, especially with boundaries, right? Knowing ahead of time how you want to ideally navigate the visitors, the social support ahead of time can be really helpful. So when the time comes where, you have to communicate it, or there might be pushback, and there will probably be some pushback from people, knowing ahead of time how you want to approach those situations can be enormously helpful, especially with a partner, right? Is to have you and your partner or spouse on the same page, so you're not kind of left in the moment going like, how do we handle this? So these are some questions that can help guide you in the boundary setting preparation. Starting with visitors, right? So what is your policy for visitors? How do we feel about people calling ahead or showing up unannounced and unplanned? How long do we want them to stay? Right? How many visitors at a time do we feel comfortable with? Is that going to change, as baby gets older, as time goes on? What boundaries should visitors also be made aware of when it comes to directly interacting with baby? So some common ones are, boundaries around holding or touching baby, masking, different vaccines, again, number of visitors, length of visit. These are all things that you not only want to have an idea of ahead of time, but also know that you will have to communicate with these visitors or these support people, right? So how will you communicate this with these people, right? Does that mean giving a call ahead of time? Does that mean giving them a text? Does it mean telling them when they first get there, right? You want to think about how you want to approach that communication with them. And also, how will you respond to pushback? Because chances are there will be some pushback, right? You might, let's say you have there's two visitors there, right? And that's what you're comfortable with. And let's say you're comfortable with, it's a half-hour visit, right? But you look at your watch and it's been 45 minutes, right? And you realize, okay, like this is past the time I'm comfortable with, past the time that my partner and I agreed on. How do you approach that with these people, right? What do you do if they say, oh, but we're having so much fun, or, well, we don't mind. We'll stay here and hold the baby, right? If you're okay with that, that's one thing. But if it's not, right? If this is a boundary that you set, how will you navigate that? So these are all really helpful questions. Again, the key is thinking about this ahead of time and knowing that you can plan, but also being flexible and adaptable to when those plans change. Last but certainly not least in this category is How could you maybe develop or create these supportive relationships in your life? Because we know that not everybody has that, quote unquote village. I think the reality is that we often can struggle with finding the type of support, especially social support, that we need during the postpartum period. So again, like I mentioned earlier, kind of connecting to the professionals and other providers that you're interacting with during the perinatal period and how they can maybe help you connect to other sources of support. But when it comes to social support, specifically, would you be open to trying to develop relationships with other people, other new moms or parents also going through something similar? And if so, what are the ways that you could do that? Where are the places that you can connect with these other new moms or parents? So, any other categories that come to mind as well? Today, we talked about 4 different categories, and it's already been over a half hour of talking, briefly, I would say, about each one of these areas of support during the postpartum period. But chances are there are probably other areas or other questions that come to mind for you. So include those because you know yourself best, right? These are meant to be prompts. These are meant to be questions to kind of start the conversation, either to get your own wheels turning in your mind or to prompt that conversation with your partner. So, thank you all for being here today, for viewing this webinar on postpartum planning. Like I mentioned, we really only skimmed the surface. This is meant to be a guide, this is meant to be a start. You might find that you have some more questions after today. As I mentioned earlier, if you find that any of the content in today's presentation brought up some more questions or even some concerns, especially about your own mental and emotional health, um, do not hesitate to reach out for additional support. If you are interested in establishing therapy, you can reach out to our office. This is my direct email. If you're interested in starting therapy or have questions about what the therapy process looks and feels like, you can feel free to reach out to me. We can set up a free, brief phone consultation to talk about that. And here is the link to the Postpartum Support International postpartum planning document that I mentioned earlier. You can Google it, you can reach out to our office, we can send it to you. It's really just kind of put in this guide document where you can actually write some responses to the questions that were presented today to help you get organized a little bit. And this is CNY Therapy Solutions contact information. So I shared my direct email address in the previous slide, but also here is our office's location and our email address if you find that you maybe want to get started with therapy for yourself or refer someone else in your life, especially if they're going through the perinatal period. Feel free to reach out to us. We're accepting new clients currently. Thanks so much for being here today, and stay tuned for our next webinar in the perinatal webinar series.